Can the world give us meaning outside of God? Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're not already subscribed. We'd love to have you on board. Like our video if you do like it, and share the video. That would really help us. In the footsteps of Padre Pio, we endeavor to know more, to help people know more about Padre Pio. Today we're going to be taking a glimpse into the life of one of Padre Pio's great assistants. Padre Pio was the great miracle worker of our Lord Jesus Christ from just last century, not that long ago. Like many saints, Padre Pio did not just stand alone. And this is the story of Mary Pyle. Mary Pyle, and what an example Mary Pyle was. Mary Pyle was born into the very elite circles of New York City. And that is in the year 1888. She had everything that the heart could desire, but ultimately ended up desiring nothing more than to live in the shadow of the Saint Padre Pio. Mary Pyle's father was James Pyle, a very successful businessman who made a fortune in New York City. And her mother was Adelaide, from the wealthy McAlpine family. Among their relatives, they numbered the Rockefellers. She literally had everything the American lifestyle could offer. And education was prized highly in those circles. She received what was considered a proper education. Private tutors, strong emphasis on languages, finishing schools, no expenses spared. By adulthood, Mary was fluent in 6 different languages, that is French, Italian, German, of course Spanish, Latin, and American. All this proved to be so useful to her later on in her future life, which was helping Padre Pio. Mary and her sister enjoyed the vast scope of New York City's culture. That is singing, dancing, theatre, the opera, the most elegant parties with New York City's most wealthy. Somewhere along the lines, she ended up meeting a Dr. Maria Montessori, who was in fact the esteemed founder of the Montessori schooling system. And enchanted, Mary took up a job with Dr. Montessori, traveling, acting as her interpreter. On their route through Europe, visited many of the Catholic shrines and cathedrals. And Adelia, as she was known at the time, was deeply edified. And she converted, taking the name Mary, and from then on was known as Mary Pyle. So how often do the beautiful shrines not perform a silent apostolate, attracting people by the spirituality of their beauty? Mary's family did not view this conversion well. They were devout Presbyterians, and she was excluded from the family fortunes, disinherited by her mother. This was Mary's first cross. Mary felt this rejection strongly. She felt it deeply, though she always harbored the hopes of a reconciliation. Instead of dropping out at this point, Mary redoubled her spiritual life, and she started seeking a spiritual director. And this is in fact where Padre Pio comes in. Here is the way that Providence wove its circuitous path. At the Church of Gesù in Rome, Mary made a novena to Our Lady of Pompeii that she might meet a good spiritual director. And shortly thereafter, she was on vacation with Dr. Montessori in the Isle of Capri. And there she met up with her good friend Rina Cattaronisi, who in fact wanted to make a visit to Padre Pio to discuss conversion. Mary was just not interested in going along. Providence had to make further plans, and Mary ultimately ended up changing her mind, and they headed off to San Giovanni Rotondo, that is the town of Padre Pio. On arriving at San Giovanni Rotondo, she must have been absolutely shocked, because the contrast between New York City elite lifestyle and San Giovanni Rotondo could not have been any stronger. From the super wealthy elite to a town without even the basics like running water or electricity, in a backwater, a forgotten town in southern Italy. But what could cause her to stay? They attended Padre Pio's Mass, and that was on the 4th of October, which is St. Francis of Assisi's feast day. So it seemed providential in that sense. And profoundly moved by the beauty of Padre Pio's Mass, they went to speak to Padre Pio afterwards. And Rina put a question to Padre Pio. Yes, definitely, was Padre Pio's answer. And when Mary Pyle met Padre Pio, this is how she describes it. At first, they just looked at each other. Then during the conversation, Mary Pyle had the profound impression that Padre Pio's penetrating gaze was in fact looking right into the depths of her soul. And then she says she fell to her knees saying, "Father." And he placed his hand on her head saying, "My child, stop traveling around and stay here." He did not even know her. How did he know that she was traveling around with Dr. Montessori? And the remainder of her trip in San Giovanni Rotondo, Mary Pyle had this feeling of a nagging sadness. I guess it was the realization that she would have to return to her job with Montessori and leave this beautiful spiritual atmosphere behind. Was she receiving a calling? Well, perhaps. Anyway, on the day of departure, Mary tried to explain as best she could to Padre Pio that she had to return to Dr. Montessori. Who is Dr. Montessori? That she should call you away. Remain here, Padre Pio said. Well, Mary Pyle left and she went back to her work with Dr. Montessori for some time. But she was unhappy. Her calling was tugging at her heart. One day, she just turned to Dr. Montessori and said, "There is a living saint in this world, and it saddens me not to be with him." That was it. They both headed off to San Giovanni Rotondo. And on the second visit, Mary Pyle again felt the same strong attraction to San Giovanni Rotondo. And this time she made up her mind. She listened to her heart and made the decision to stay permanently. So thereafter, Dr. Montessori and her had to go to Rome to collect all of her belongings. When the bus arrived, Mary found she was somehow paralyzed. She was unable to get onto the bus. Dr. Montessori turned to her and said, "What's wrong?" She responded, "I feel like my feet are just nailed to the ground." Well, Dr. Montessori got onto the bus and they never met again. So this was a second blow, a double cross, we must say. Firstly, she had been disinherited by her family, and now also misunderstood by the colleague that she admired so much, and with no job security to return to. All of this in one of the remotest, poorest parts of Italy. What could have kept her there? Mary had found her home, and that was to be near a living saint.
In nome del Padre, del Figliolo e dello Spirito Santo, e così sia. Sia lodato Gesù e Maria, e
To see our most popular video, please just click on the one above there. That is on the guardian angels. And if you want to know more about In the Footsteps of Padre Pio, then you click on the other video.